Hey everybody, it's Berkeley time, so we'll be starting now. Welcome everybody. This is lesson 11. We're going to be doing Express and MongoDB, and I'm Nemr once again. So just a quick recap on what we covered last time. Last time we covered HTTP, REST, and Postman. HTTP is a protocol that allows different computers to communicate between each other over the internet. So you have client side as well as server side. Servers are the areas which contain all the information that then sends the information back to the client, which is what's making the HTTP request in the first place. Then you have REST APIs. REST is an architectural structure for APIs, and APIs are application programming interfaces, which allow two applications to communicate with each other. These two applications could be just your backend and your front end, but it could also be two separate applications like LinkedIn and your application communicating with each other. And then finally, we use Postman to test out API endpoints or to test out sample HTTP requests. It just displays it in a really nice way and allows us to know that we're doing stuff properly. That's pretty much it for this type of stuff that we covered last time. And here's like kind of the structure of exactly what we covered last time. So we have like the web app in your browser. So that's your computer. You send a request over by putting a website or by making a request of some API that sends some information to an API, which processes your request, sends that information over to a server, which can collect information from a database if necessary. And if it is necessary, it'll package that data and then send it back to you in the form of a response. So that's like a pretty good summation of how HTTP requests work, combined with everything else we discussed last time. The next thing is Express. You guys may have already seen Express before if you've started on homework 6 or in like maybe mentioned in reference in the past couple of lectures, but Express is a backend web application framework for Node.js. So you may have used Axios, that's more so for front end. Express is that for backend. And it's designed for building web applications and APIs. So it's really useful in that sense. And here's like an example of a snippet of code. You are first creating an Express object and then making the Express server on your backend. And then you're writing your HTTP request paths down below. So you're writing app.get / you're getting the request and response, and then you're sending a response with the following information. And then you're also listening on the port provided. So that's just like basically starting up your app on that port. And then you also create a GET request. Are there any questions regarding Express or anything I've just gone over, including the recap from last time? What's up?
I was just wondering for like React, do you import it that way?
Yeah, so whenever you're importing, so what you'll have to do is first you'll have to npm install Express, and then you'll have to make an Express object like this. So in backend coding, we use require instead of import. Yeah. Any questions apart from that? That was a great question. Any questions? Cool. So then we're going to move on to databases. So databases are organized collections of structured information or data typically stored electronically in a computer system. And there's two main types of databases. You first have SQL databases, which are like Postgres and Microsoft SQL Server. These are like a Google Sheets where each line of data corresponds to one data point, and you have different columns that correspond to different categories that each data has. So yeah, just think of this like a Google Sheet. That's basically what it is. And the other type of database is NoSQL databases, which are not like Google Sheets. Instead, you define schemas, which are structures in which objects that your data, when your data is collected, that's how it may look like. So you may have like a user object with like an email, username, and password. That's like the general structure of how a user will look in your database. And you'll just store those objects in your database, and then your database will collect information whenever a user logs in per se, and then store that information like that. So instead of you like line by line writing out like every single person, you'll create objects for every single different type of data you're storing. So, and some of those examples include MongoDB and DynamoDB. And today we're really going to be mainly using MongoDB. And MongoDB is just a NoSQL database that's pretty easy, and the learning curve isn't too high. So that's what we're going to be starting off with, and that's what you guys are going to be using on the next homework, I believe. Are there any questions regarding MongoDB or databases? Cool. Then moving, sorry, what's up?
Question. So, if NoSQL And what is the main difference in SQL and NoSQL is the flexibility or the lack of structure.
So I wouldn't say that's like a major difference. It'd just be in the way data is stored. So in SQL databases, everything is line by line, whereas in like NoSQL databases, it's object based. So if you've worked with like objects before in previous programming classes, that's how each data point is stored. It's stored as an object versus being stored as like a line of code or just like a line of text.
So it's a collection of
Sorry?
Is it a collection of objects? Is that a good characterization?
Yeah. So now we're going to be moving on to the demo, but before we move on to the demo, I just kind of wanted to show you guys how MongoDB kind of looks when you make a database on it. So MongoDB works by you making like projects, and then within those projects, you can have databases. So right now I have this thing called cluster1. That is not the project name. That is just the upper category in which projects are contained. So you can have multiple projects in a cluster. My project's name is web dev demo, and then I can have databases within that specific project. So in this database within this like project, I have sample Airbnb listings, which is just the default database they provide you. And I'm just going to show you guys how the database is kind of structured. So if we scroll down, we can kind of see, I'm not sure, is it like too small or can you guys see? I'm just going to zoom in. But if you can kind of see every single like kind of block you have right here, this block represents one housing unit on Airbnb. So it has like the listing URL somewhere around here, the neighborhood overview, the description, the ID, the name. These are all characteristics of a house that's up for rent on Airbnb. So every single one of these blocks, so there's like a bunch of them if you keep scrolling, every single one of these blocks is a sample house up for rent on Airbnb. So that's kind of like how your database will be structured. And as you can see, they're like objects because they have multiple fields that can be filled in and can be updated. And we can also filter for specific values by first doing curly braces, then writing the name for the field. So let's say I want to get the name of something, and then I can get that value. So I just want this specific data point. I can do that, and voila, I've queried results for this specific object. So you can find different objects by putting in values or putting in fields and then putting in the respective values. Last time we went over how to query results using HTTP requests. This is very similar to that. And this should be like pretty simple to understand if you guys were here last time and if you guys understand querying, which is not too difficult of a concept. Yeah, what's up?
So is it like dictionary?
Yeah, it is pretty much a dictionary. Yeah.
Sick.
Any other questions? So cool. That's just how MongoDB databases are structured. And now we'll like go into kind of building our own. So in order to kind of follow along, if you guys do want to, get like Mongo sh installed. So if you have Homebrew, you can just install like the Mongo shell script command, which is going to be necessary for making our database on the command line. So right now, let me just cd out of this directory and let me make a new directory. Let me call it like practicing Mongo or something. Let's call it Mongo pract. Okay, cd Mongo pract. And then once I'm in that directory, I want to create a new like kind of project. And the way I do this npm init. This will create a package.lock JSON file, which I can use to store dependencies, and I can put like node modules into. So like right now, it's going to give me like a bunch of information that I can potentially put in. I don't care about that right now, so I'm just going to click enter and everything. But if you guys are making your own projects from scratch, you guys can use npm init. And then for instance, where is it? Git repository, you can put the Git repository in. Some keywords, author, license, you can put that all in. For now, we don't really care, and that's fine with me. So great. Let me open this guy up in VS Code. Fantastic. So I'll full screen this. Okay, and the first thing I want to do is I want to make an index.js file. That's where like all my backend code is really going to go. Kind of like your HTML files you guys are working with in like the first couple of lectures. You had an index.html file. Well, for the backend, it's the same thing. It's just index.js. So that's the first thing we kind of want to make. And the next thing we want to do is we want to install all the dependencies. And the dependencies you guys will need are the following. So npm install -- save. This will save the whatever dependencies you get to your specific package.lock JSON file. So the dependencies I want to install are Express. Remember, that's the backend web application framework for the servers that we're going to need. So that is essentially very important. Then we're also going to need to install cores. This is for IP routing. This tells us which IP addresses can access our specific database and can interact with our API. We won't be using that too much in this lecture, but it's still very useful to have. And you guys might need to use it on your own projects. Then we'll need to install Mongoose. Mongoose allows us to communicate with MongoDB, like our database in MongoDB. So it allows us to do read-write operations as well as update or access information from the MongoDB databases. So that's also something we'll need over there. And then we'll need something called bcrypt.js. This is really useful for encrypting your passwords. So we don't want to store users' passwords like just their password in the database. We want to encrypt that somehow, and we use bcrypt.js to do that. And the next thing we'll kind of need is JSON Web Token. So when a user signs in, they'll be sent a JSON Web Token, which will be stored locally on their device. So every other time they log in, that JSON Web Token will just be sent over instead, and that'll help them sign in. This is just like an added layer of security, and that's something we like to use. And I'll get more into like exactly how we're going to use it. And then we're going to use Express Validator, which helps make sure that our specific routes are correct, and it double checks, like it allows us to basically do a lot of routing through HTTP requests. And then the next thing we need is nodemon. So nodemon is kind of like npm start, but for backend servers. So whenever your server is updated or whenever you make any changes to any of your files, it'll just restart the server for you. So you won't have to continuously click over and over again. And the last thing we'll need is .env. So you guys may have played around a little bit with .env files. .env, like the npm module, just allows you to kind of interact with those files. We're not using that, but this is just useful for your own projects. So I'm just going to npm install it so you guys know how to, like, have seen it before at least. So I'll click enter, and then hopefully this will install. And then while it's installing, I want to go over the JSON Web Tokens. So let's go over here. So yeah, so token-based authentication starts with you sending some login data, which is like your username and password. And then with the database or with our servers, we'll make a JSON Web Token with some secret code. And that JSON Web Token will be like an encrypted, a long string that your browser can use to continuously access our website. And we'll send back the JSON Web Token through an HTTP response. And then we'll also have like authenticated requests with JWT in the header. So whenever we're trying to re-sign into the application, we'll send an HTTP request with the JSON Web Token in the header of our request. And then the web application will look at that JSON Web Token, verify that it works, and then say, fantastic, you're good, and then log us in by sending a response back that says you're good, and then logging us in and giving us all those features that come with logging us in. So that's like a good overview of how JSON Web Tokens work. And then here is like that much more into depth. So you make a post request first with all of that information. Then you check if it's an existing user, and then you save the user to the database, and then you return the message registered successfully. That is how you make a user. So if a new user wants to sign up for your service, that is an example of user registration. Then we do user logins, which is you post the username and the password. Then you make a JWT token, you send it back over, and then every repeating time, they just use the JWT token to make sure that they're good to go with the application. So today, basically what we're doing is we're just making this type of thing. We're making the user authentication service. So creating a way for users to sign up and log in to this application. And that's like the crux of what we're going to do today. What's up?
So I was kind of confused how 3 and 4 are connected. Like I get how the 1, 2, 3, that sort of flow happens. But then how does it go to like the second, the access user?
Yeah. So when you're initially like logging in, once you've just made your account and you're logging into the application, you'll send the username and the password over, and then you'll get the JWT token back. And once you get that JWT token, that will be stored locally on your device, and you'll get that, all that information over here. So then every subsequent time you come back to the app, you can just use the JWT token, and that'll allow you to get in. Yeah, so just the first time you use user login, and the subsequent times you go through steps 4 through 6. Yeah, any other questions? Cool. If there are no questions, I'm just going to continue. So as you can see, there are a few new files in our VS Code. We have index.js, package.lock.json, and then package.json. So all of our new kind of modules have been downloaded into our repository. And the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make an Express kind of server. So the way we do that is like the following. So it requires kind of like import. And it does the exact same thing. It's just we use that on the backend. Then we're also going to make this thing called a body parser. This is useful for like parsing information about JSON. So like whenever you're send some JSON information, body parser is used to kind of take that JSON object and then make it readable. And then like you can play around with the data that you get from there. So we're going to require body parser. And we're going to start our app. Whoops. Great. And the next thing we're going to do is we're also going to make our port. And we can just make it like that. So that our port can just be localhost / 4000. So I'm just going to leave it at that. You can make it whatever you want. It's just going to change whenever you're doing like requests or anything like that. The next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to make our first path, which is going to be app.use. And then we're going to want to use body parser. And then we're going to add this JSON method, which is just going to parse the JSON whenever the JSON is like pushed into our database. So that could be like whenever you're sending over a request, you'll send over that data in JSON. This like app.use. So like the flow of the request will go from the top of this document all the way to the bottom. So this body parser will just kind of parse through that JSON and then give me and allow me to kind of use this in the next couple of lines. So that's going to be really useful whenever I'm writing the next lines of my code. Then I'm going to do app.get request, or sorry, app.get slash. So whenever somebody goes to the slash on my web page, they're going to get the following information. And I'm going to do request and then response, and then I'm going to make an arrow function. And then over there, I'm going to make a response.json with just the message. The API is working. So this just shows, for me at least, that like this application is working so far, and there are no issues that I can kind of see in that. So this is just for me to know that this application is working, and these like few couple of first steps are great. And then the last thing I want to do is I want to do the app.listen thing. So I showed this earlier in the presentation, but I'm going to want an app.listen to start the server up at port 4000. So I'm going to want to do it at port, and then I'm going to want request response, and then another arrow function. And then I'm going to want to console.log that the server has started at port $this port. So this will just give me my port number. And this should be logged whenever I like make a request to that specific port. Any questions on any of the code that I've written so far? Solved. So I'm just going to go into Postman and just see that it's working. So I've like kind of just been playing around with that, and we can go localhost / 4000 / send. What's up? Oh, my bad. I forgot to start my node backend. So the way I do that is npx nodemon index.js. So that starts up the index.js and activates it so that the server should be working now. And voila. Now if I make the get request, hopefully it works. Voila. So there we go. My backend is working and it's fully functional and it's active at that specific localhost. And I can check that in the console log. Server has started at port 4000. So fantastic. Any questions on what I've done so far? Is there any confusion? Is there anything you guys want to ask or anything I should clarify? What's up?
Sorry, what is the slash in the get?
So yeah, that's the file path. So whenever a user tries to go to the website's URL and then has a slash right there, that is like, I should just get that information that is accessible, and my like application has access to that area, and I can like manipulate some information there. So right now, like this is just for me to understand that my code is working. This is not like something you'd have on your website. This is just when you're testing stuff. Yeah. So just like to clarify, I guess like the first part, the part in the string, that is like the resource or file path that the user goes to based on your like website. So in this case, that's just adding a slash after your domain name. And when they do that, it'll take the request. There's obviously no request here because it's a GET request, and then it'll send a JSON response saying the API is working. So that's pretty much it. Good question. So yeah, what's up?
So is the like the rec, are you use that for like getting a request from there, like for data, or?
Yeah, so the request is whenever like a user goes to a specific page on your application, they'll ask, hey, they'll ask your server, can I get some information back? And we define what information we're going to give back to them. So whenever they go to the slash part, we'll give them this information. We'll give them this response from the backend. Yeah, good question.
Sorry. So what would how would you use the rec? How do you like for res? You just said that just so you wanted to do something with like what is the rec?
Yeah, the recs. So REQ stands for request. So whenever anybody goes to like a specific part of your website, they'll send over a request and you'll have to give back a response. So my computer, if I go to youtube.com, it'll send a request to YouTube servers for some information, and YouTube servers will send that back in the form of a response. There are multiple types of like methods you could have here. So right now we're using a get method. All that does is get some information from the people or from like the servers. So in this part, like the request isn't super relevant. It's just the response. So yeah, yeah, that's why it's kind of like faded out. But yeah. Any other questions? Okay, cool. And the next thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to make a new terminal. I'm going to just change it to bash because, again, I'm getting some weird errors with ZSH. So I'm just going to work with bash. And in bash, I'm going to just type mongo sh. So this is the Mongo shell script. And what it should do for me is create a sample database for me to work with. So hopefully it does that. Beautiful, it did. Very happy with that. Otherwise, I probably would have like died. But here is my specific. So here's like the URL at which I'm connected to. And then if I scroll all the way down, this is the name of the database. So this is just like a sample database it made for me just to play around with this. When you guys are making your own apps, if you go to like MongoDB, there should be like, if I like go out of here, there should be some option to kind of connect. So if I go to like web dev demo or something, yeah, there should be this option called connect, and you can connect in a variety of ways. So you can connect through the MongoDB shell. You'll get like a URL. So if I click on that, I don't really care right now because I'm not going to do this, but you can take this line of code down here and you can just plug that in to your terminal, and it should automatically connect you to the database. So this is something you guys will do when you're making your apps. I'm just making like a test database for me to test out a couple of features and show to you how they work. But apart from that, yeah, this is something you guys can use in your projects. Are there any questions regarding that? What's up?
Wait, so is Mongo, sorry, is MongoDB like platform as a service, or is it, or how does it work exactly? Because I'm just a little confused. Because if you can install it as a node package, yeah, I guess I'm just a little confused about the nature of MongoDB as a company.
So MongoDB, all it does for you is provide like database support, and it allows you to kind of connect their database with your application. So we didn't really download Mongo as like a node repository or as a node module. What we did is we downloaded a service that allows us to connect our application to Mongo as a node module. So we don't download Mongo itself. Mongo stores probably our database somewhere in the cloud. I think it's AWS. They give you the choice. It's like AWS, Google, or whatever, Microsoft. I think Microsoft Azure. They store your data up there, and you just connect it with your web app. That's basically what they're doing. So they're offering like cloud-based databases, and you just connect it with your application, and you have flexibility in making those databases so whichever way they fit your application.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Any other questions? If there are none, then the next thing we need to kind of do is we need to create our database and kind of format how our app interacts with it. So what we'll need to do is we'll need to create a config file and then a database.js file. You can name this whatever you want. I'm just naming it db.js so I can keep track of it. And then the first thing I'm going to want to do is allow us to connect by making a mongoose object with the MongoDB database that we just made. So const mongoose equals require mongoose. This is just how you import stuff in the backend. And the next thing that I'm going to want to do is I'm going to make a Mongo URI. So this allows me to get access to my database at a specific URL. So const Mongo URI, and that is equivalent to the following string down here. So right over here, everything up till there. That should be what I copy into that. And then I do slash the name of the database. So slash test. This is going to be slightly different when you guys are connecting your own database from their website. And you guys are going to have to figure out how to optimize that. So this is just how we're doing it for now, but you guys will have to change it whenever you guys are making your own applications. Then the next thing we want to do is we want to make an initiate Mongo server function. Server. And we're going to want to make it a arrow function. Great. And within this function, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to put a try catch statement where we await Mongoose to connect to the URI. So Mongoose allows us to connect to different applications, and we're going to allow Mongoose to kind of connect to the Mongo URI we specified up there. So we're going to want that as our first field. And then as our second field, we're going to want to have a field called use new URL parser, and that should be .true. So this just parses the URL and allows us to get access to that database. So this is an await function. We're just going to want to await for Mongoose to connect to this, and then we're going to want to proceed down our code. And then once we do that, we're going to want to console.log connected to DB, just to tell us that, hey, this has worked. We are now connected to the database. So that's that part. And then we're also going to want to have a catch statement where we catch any errors that happen. So in case, like, for some reason this doesn't work, we want to catch that error and then console log that error so that we know what's going on and why that error is happening. And then we're going to want to throw the error. So that just like stops the app and finishes it off. So now we can kind of go ahead and export this function. So we'll need, okay, why is this hovering in red? This should be probably, I think, async. Right, async. Yeah, it's going to need to be async. And then we're going to do module.exports equals initiate Mongo server. So what this last statement, what it allows us to do is export any functions we've created in a file and then export it outside so we can use it in different files. And the way we can use it in different files is we can just, like for instance, const initiate Mongo server equals require. So we use the require statement and then we use the relative file path. So // okay, I don't know why it's going all the way there. /config/. So this will get whatever we exported from that specific file into this initiate Mongo server kind of thing. And then over here, we can just initiate Mongo server, boom, like that. And now it should work. So if we go to our other terminal, yep, there we go. Now it's connected to our database. So through that process, we've kind of used the database.js file and the configs to connect our Mongo database that we made in the terminal to our application over here. Are there any questions about what I did in those steps? Cool, solid. Then I'll just continue. The next thing I want to do is I want to make our user schema. So I want to make a models folder. So this is going to contain the models of how my data is going to look. So models, whoops, delete. So I'm going to want to make a models folder. And within that folder, I'm going to want to store the different data that I'm going to want to have. So for now, it's just going to contain user data, which is going to be an object that shows how user data should be stored in my database. So I'm going to want to make a models folder over here. And then within that models folder, I'm going to want to make like a user.js. And then in there, some things that I might want is Mongoose again. So Mongoose equals require Mongoose. And then other things I may need at the very top of my file is this method called user schema. So this is like an object I'm creating, which is the which demonstrates how user data should be stored within my database. So const user schema, should be schema, equals mongoose dot create model, I believe. Create mongo.schema, my bad. And then you do like this, and then you can put different fields in here. So you can put username, type, so you can put different like items you want within your objects. within this larger object. And what you need to put is the type of the object as well as whether it's required. So we can just quickly copy paste this specific line of code down the file. And then what we need to do is we need to change these specific entries. So maybe one we want to have is email, the other is password, and the last one is created at, which tells us the date at which it's created at. So over here, these types should be also string. They should also be required. Otherwise, our object or our code should not be able to make a new user object. So we want to make sure we have all these fields. And then for this last object, we want the type to be a date. And then we want the default value of this to be date.now. So that's just going to give us like the current date and make that the created at value if no created at value is passed in. So we do need the upper three, but for the last one, we can just make that on our own. So that's pretty much it for this. And then we want to make sure that we export it. And the way we export this is a little bit kind of interesting. And the way we export it is module.exports equals mongoose.create or mongoose.model. And then we put a string name in for it here, and then we export the user schema. So user schema. So there we go. That's how you export user schemas out of your thing. You need to create a mongoose.model object, which takes in whatever data you've made up there and then exports it as a model, which we can use to kind of model how data should be stored in our database. Are there any questions regarding the user schema or what I just did right now? What's up? So the user string is just a name I gave to it. I just made it user because this is how user objects should be. User objects should look. So whenever I import it, it has this name. I can also change the variable name to store this information. Any other questions? Okay, so the next thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to go to routes. So what a route is it defines different ways in which my API can work. So given a specific file path, what should my code do? Routes can determine what my code should do given a specific file path. And we can, so previously we were kind of doing this in our index.js where we have app.get : This is like the, sorry, my bad. App.get : or quote slash. This is getting us the file path to like the get request area, and we can like write app.post or app.get for all these different file paths. But at the end of the day, that's going to be really tedious. And one way to kind of simplify that and make it easier for us to process is by using these things called routes. And routes can contain all these file paths within it and what we should do given those file paths. So I'll show you, and when I'm showing you guys, it'll make a little bit more sense. But we're just doing like this app.get thing and just pushing it into routes instead, just to make it a little bit more simplified. So within routes, I want to create a user.js file, and this user, I'm calling it user.js because it's file paths for the /user. So whenever anybody in our website types /user, this routes are going to handle all the possible commands you can have there. So that's like kind of the point of routes, and that's how we're going to use them. So it'll make more sense as I go, but just for now, kind of follow along. So we're going to have first an express object where we're going to require express. Same way we've been importing express dot before, and then we're going to have a router which equals express dot router. So that should be, yes, that should be the right syntax. And then we're going to want a command, and the way we make a command is by writing the name of the object, the name of the router object, so that's router, and then router.post. And we're going to want to make a, so it's going to be, I believe it's going to be like this. And then within these kind of parentheses, we're going to want to write the specific file path we want to go through. So for the first one, it's going to be through signup. So whenever anybody types user/signup, they'll go and this router will be activated. Whatever code you write before, all that code is going to be activated whenever anybody tries to sign up for our application. So sign up. And then within sign up, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make an async function with a request and a response, and like that. And then once we get that async function over there, we're going to want a little bit of data from the request. So whenever anybody is trying to sign up, they should send some data in the form of the request. So that should be the username, the email, and the password. So I can just make 3 objects and then make that equal to request.body. and then this will get me like whatever information they passed to me. So that's going to be like the username, email, and password. And the next thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to make a try catch block. So I'm going to make the try statement. And within the try statement, what I kind of want to do is I want to make a user variable that stores whether this user exists in my database. And the way I'd kind of do that is I do await user.find1, and then I put in the email. So this would check whether a user exists, given like there is the email there. So remember the user object is the schema we made, the /model/user. There are predefined functions in MongoDB that allow us to query the database and find out whether specific users exist given the data we're sending in. So right now we're using .find1 to see if there exists a user that has the specific email that's being passed in. And if there does, we're going to make an error statement because this is a user signing up for the first time. So they're just making an account. They shouldn't already have one. If they do, that's an error. So we want to make an if user. So if the user exists, then we want to do a few things. And the first thing might be we want to send a res.status 400. So if you guys remember from last time, we have different statuses under which our responses fall under. So 400 is a client-side error, which means that the request they sent was bad. They're sending a requested /sign up or create a new account when they already have an account. That is a bad request. And per that bad request, we should send them back like some JSON telling them that, hey, you already have an account, or like the user already exists. So this is just like a JSON object that's being sent over that tells the user, hey, your account already exists. Why are you signing up? You should do something else, right? And this is just there. And this just like kicks us out early in case they made an error when they're signing up. So we error check for the fact that they might already have an account. That's pretty much what this code block is doing. And the next thing we want to do is we want to, if that is not true, so if that is true, like if they already have an account, the code kicks out here because it'll just return a response.status of 400. But if that is not true, we want to make a new user object, which contains the username, email, and password. So we want to take the values we got from the request.body earlier and then pass them into a new user object. So remember, we made schemas. Those are like objects, and we can pass in certain values into them. And here's an example of us passing the username, email, and password we got from the request. And we can put that into a new user schema, and we can create a new user object, which is going to be the new user's kind of login. Are there any questions about what I've done in this step or anything I've done in the past? What's up?
A little bit. How is the format of like curly braces with multiple arguments? Is that like?
Oh, which part are you looking at?
Like the const, you know, have this like curly braces.
The first one?
Yeah, and then also the user.
The user. Yeah, okay. So whenever you're passing in like variables or getting variables from a request body, you want to use curly braces. That's like one instance where you use curly braces. Another instance where you use curly braces is when you're making a JSON object. So if you go to the response.status, whenever we're making a JSON object, we first had the parentheses, which calls the JSON method. And then you have to have curly braces inside of it just to store all the information within the JSON request. And if you want to have multiple fields, you can separate them by commas. And then for whenever we're making this new user object, we need to maintain like the value of these variables and pass them in. And the way we do that in JavaScript is by using the curly braces. So that's why I've used like the curly braces so much in my code. Does that make sense? So far we just kind of have a new user object. And the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to encrypt their password. And the way we do that is kind of interesting. So we first make something called a salt. And I'm going to need to import bcrypt. So the way I import, I've done this a few times, but it's just like this, bcrypt.js. So this imports the bcrypt kind of module we downloaded earlier, and this helps us encrypt our password. So I can do bcrypt.gen salt, and then I put a number in here. And what salt is, this is like a little bit more advanced than for computer security. It just adds random numbers into your password so that whenever it's being encoded, it's harder for hackers to guess because now there's just like a bunch of random numbers in there and they're not going to be able to just like kind of guess it and figure it out. So that's going to make like accessing your password and encrypting your password even better and accessing your password even harder. So that's why we use salt. And then I'm going to want to hash my password. So password, I'm going to want to set that equal to or I'm gonna want to take the field. So I've created this new user object so I can get their password. And I want to hash their old password. So I do salt and then password decrypt.hash. So this is going to take the salt and their password, and it's going to hash the password based on the salt and based on some like other hash code method Bcrypt has. So what this will basically do is just encrypt the password. Now hackers really won't be able to guess it, and I've made it slightly more complicated with salt. That's like the generally good way of thinking about it. And just a error I made here. This is supposed to be password and this is supposed to be salt. Yeah, so you put the password first and then the salt afterwards. But yeah, so that's how I basically encrypted this password. And then after I've done this, I want to save the user to our database. And the way I do that is I use this save method. And the save method takes the user object and then pushes it into our database. So I've collected all this information. I made this user object, but I also need to put it in my database. This is how I do this. I await user.save. And that's pretty much it for just making a user object. And then in case there's an error somewhere in between this, I'm going to want to catch the error. And then I'm going to want to maybe send, like, I want to console log the error so I can, whoops. I'm going to want to console log the error. So that helps me figure it out. And then I'm also going to want to send this as a response. So response.status 500, which means that there's an internal server error, which means we made a mistake on our part. And it's going to tell the user like, maybe like I'm going to send like a message that just says error in saving. So like whenever the user like for some reason can't make their account, it's on us. We just send like this message to them. And we also need to send a res.status thing, because if you look at the very top, we've taken a request and then send out a response. So we're going to want to not just throw an error, we're also going to want to format that error as a response. So that's why we do the res.status 500.send error in saving. Are there any questions regarding anything I've asked or? Okay, cool. If not, what we can do from here is we're going to want to add a JWT token at the very top. So remember when I was showing you guys how users sign in, they use something called a JWT token. Well, we're going to have to make that somehow, and we use the JWT model or the JSON web token module we made. So we just import JSON web token at the very top. And the way we do all that information is not too difficult. We just do something called const payload. And we make this, I believe, in arrow function, although like, yes, const payload. And then we make a function like this. And that contains like the user's ID. So this should be working. What's the error? I'm not 100% sure what the error is, but this should be fine. Maybe it's expecting a comma down here. There we go. There we go. So that stores an ID in this like new user object we've made within payload, and that contains the user's ID. So I didn't mention this earlier, but in our MongoDB server, so in the database, browse collections. Yeah, so in each specific object we've made, we have an ID, and that ID is a specific number that MongoDB creates on its own, and it's unique for every single object within the database. So we just kind of store that within every single object, and then we can kind of use that to our advantage. And we can use that to encrypt and make the JWT token in the first place. So we're going to need to make a payload. That's how you make a payload. It's just a user object with its specific ID. And we're going to use that later on whenever we are creating the JWT thing. And then the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to use this method called JWT.sign. And we're going to want to make the payload. Then we're going to want to make a random string. So you can put any string in here, and this is for creating a signature for the JWT token. This is a little bit out of scope for whatever we're going to go over, but this is just useful for encryption and making sure that we have the correct levels of security, which is really important. So for now, you can just put any string you want, just remember the string. So let's say I want to put random string. It doesn't matter. And then I'm going to also want to add an expires in field over here, which is an allotted amount of time in which this JWT token expires in. So after some period of time, you guys may notice you need to log back into an account, like it doesn't remember you for some reason. That's because the JWT token has expired. So it has like an expiry date attached to it. And companies will often just continuously change the random string they've attached just to make sure that their security is at a very high level. So your JWT token might expire often, and you might want to attach that quantity over here. So for right now, we don't want it to expire really fast, so we'll make it 10,000 seconds. So it'll expire in 10,000 seconds. That's a little bit near like a weekish. And the last thing we'll want to do is like, in case for some reason, like this is not working, there is some issue going on, we'll want an error token. So we'll want to pass in a error. And the way we pass in the error is a little bit interesting. So the syntax is different from what we've been doing in the past. So if error, throw error. And if there's not an error, what I want to do is I want to send a res.status 200 as a JSON object. And I'm going to want to put the token inside of it. So this will just send the token back to the user so they can store it on their side. And that is how you make a JWT.sign. And it seems like everything is good here. And the next thing that I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to export this router. So at the very bottom, I can just do module.export equals a router. So remember, this is my router object. I've made a method within there and I've defined that method. And now all I'm doing is exporting that router so I can use it in different files. So I can come back to index.js and then I can import the router. ./routes/user. So this will be like my router for my user. And for now, I'm just going to change the name because I don't have a user in here. So I'm just going to like make that my thing. And then over down here, I'm going to make an app.use/user/ and then that's going to be my resource path. So whenever I go to the /user area in my file, I'm going to use a router called user. So this basically makes my code look a little bit nicer, and then also kind of abstracts or kind of splits up the tasks separately so it looks nice and easier for me to handle. So all I've done is instead of writing the app.post/whatever user/signup, so instead of writing all that stuff here, so that would be like app.post /user/signup. Instead of writing that here and then writing all that code down below, I've just put that in the router file. That's all I've done. So the routers are just like taking that away and putting that over there, and I can just use that router object to make app.use instead. So it just makes my life simpler and allows me to error test a little bit more easily. That's the only reason we do it. Are there any questions regarding something I've done or any issues like understanding something? Okay. And if there are any questions, just interrupt me at some point, and then we can kind of go over it. And now we're going to want to test that our methods are actually working. So I'm going to want to go to the specific directory, and I'm going to want to do a post command. So okay, it's glitching. So I'm just going to add a new field. Okay. Why is it not allowing me to do this? Okay, I'm just going to restart Postman real fast because it's acting up. But basically what you want to do is you want to check whether that endpoint is working. So you'll want to make a post command towards /user/signup, and it should work, or it should just send the error message back. So let's go ahead and do that. Post /user/signup. And then in my body, I'm going to want to send a JSON object. And the way you do that is scroll up. There is JSON over here. Okay. I believe it's like this username. Oh, my bad. You have to put it in quotes. So username. So JSON has like its own specific syntax. You have to put the keys in quotes, and then you make it equivalent to like some username. So let's say it's Bob. And for the email, let's say that is equal to bob@gmail.com. And then finally, we have our password. So we can just put in something random for this, and it doesn't really matter. It can be like Bob123, and voila, cancel. This should work now. Syntax error. Pre-syntax double quoted. Oh, my bad. So let's try that again. Cannot post /user/signup. Why is that? Should work. It is a JSON. Okay, so there seems to be a slight error. I'm going to see if I can kind of figure this out. And this should give you like a good idea of how to decode whenever you're writing out your database. So you'll get issues like this sometimes, and we just have to figure out exactly where it's going on, coming from. So cannot post /user/signup. So maybe I made the link wrong. Yes, that was the issue. You're supposed to put the path over there. So I forgot to include a slash there. And now it should work, I'm hoping. There we go. User already exists. So in my previous commands, I probably already filled that in. So instead of doing that, let me change the email to like Bob123. What is now your issue? App crashed. Okay, great. So we're just going to restart. npx nodeman index.js. Okay. Now can you work? Error in saving. Beautiful. And now you're failing again. Okay, so I don't know what's going on. And we're gonna just try changing this person entirely and maybe if it works. So person, and then we're gonna make the password person123. So let's hope my laptop doesn't die. Hey, what is your issue now? No, it's a, okay, so there's some weird thing going on and it's not letting me do anything. So let's try this again. And I'm gonna make a raw JSON object. Username colon hello email hello@gmail.com and then password. So we can just put a random password in and we want to make sure it's a post request. Okay, what is your issue? Okay, maybe it's giving me, okay, so it's just crashing every time. And there seems to be like some error within bcrypt. So maybe I'm not importing it properly. That's maybe the issue. So let's go back to bcrypt.js. And maybe I haven't installed it. Maybe that's the issue. So Control C, npm. Okay, what is your issue? Okay. My bad. It's not supposed to have a dash or not a dot in between it. Okay, let's go back to the db.js, not db.js, roots file, and let's make sure that bcrypt.js is right. This looks fine. I don't understand what the issue is. Maybe the issue is in my hashing. So let's see if that's the issue. Yes. So this could be because I'm not putting the await function down here. So it's not waiting for the salt to be there. And that's why it's giving me the issue. So let's put awaits there. And hopefully this now works. I think it should, but you never know. Okay, let's find out what else. Oh, I have not started my server. That's why. Oh, my bad. There we go. Yeah, so oftentimes whenever you're writing this, you will get like a ton of errors and you just have to look through where you're getting the errors and then debug them as we go. So this is more authentic than if I had just gotten on the first try. So yeah, you will like suffer a lot when you're writing backend code. And we're just going to continue from there now. And like, so now we can see like our post request is working. Whenever we're sending that post request, we are getting that JSON web token back. And we can kind of test and play around with this JSON web token just to see like kind of how it works. So we can take that JSON web token and there's this pretty cool website called jwt.io and it allows you to kind of play around with JSON web tokens. So I want to use this. There we go. So we can paste in our thing right there. And So you want to enter your random string that whatever you put there. And as you can see, like right now, the string over there, the signature value is invalid. It's just this random value. And if you replace it with the actual value, so for us it was random string, it's a signature verified right now. But if we revert it to something else, it should reload and it should tell us. So I guess the Wi-Fi is kind of slow, but earlier it was telling us the signature was not verified. And this is what our random string kind of does for us. It changes up this last blue part and that encodes everything. And you can kind of see what is encoded into what. So in the very first part, we're using this algorithm called HS256, which helps like kind of encrypt our passwords, which is probably what bcrypt is doing. Then we also have this user object in the purple part, which is like the ID. That's our payload that we made. And then that's all like the expiry data and then all the other stuff we put into it. So as you can see, this this string is just kind of a combination of all the data we gave it, and it just hashes that into this string so hackers can't like use it to make new versions of the JSON web token and gain access to our database. So it's all security stuff. And if it's going over your head, it doesn't really matter too much. But this is just kind of like the general idea of how we're using this and why we're using this. And then also this thing below is how we encode the signature of the string. So it should not say signature verified. I'm hoping that's slow internet. And the signature is just the blue part. So that blue part changes whenever I change this part. And that blue part has to match up with the JSON web token. Otherwise, the JSON web token will be incorrect. Are there any questions regarding anything I've done in the post requests, the routers, or anything else? Okay, solid. So I'm just going to then continue on to the next part of this. And the next part is kind of going to be pretty similar to what we just did. So we've made this /signup method. The next thing I might want to do is maybe make the same thing, but what if I want to allow a user to like log in normally? So I'm not creating a new user this time. I'm just allowing a user to just log into their account. And the way I do that is I do router.post. And we can just reopen this, and it's going to look very similar syntactically to how I made it up here. So I'm just going to have like the file or URL path. So this would be login. And this would then also have like very similar code to this. So I'd make an async request up here. And then when you're logging in, okay, pause over there. Yeah, so whenever you're logging in, you might pass different information. So whenever you're logging in, usually it's just like your email and your password. So we're going to want to have that, and we're going to set that equal to request.body. So now we're just getting our email and our password like we did before, and then we're going to want this try catch block, kind of similar to how we made it last time, and we're just going to edit it here and there because that should be pretty equivalent to what we did last time. So it should be like pretty similar. It's not going to be super different from what we did last time. There's just going to be like a few minor quirks here and there that we're going to need to change and that we're going to need to update just to make sure everything is working. So the first thing we're going to need to change is let user await dot find one email. That should be fine. But in case the user does not exist, so in this case, if we actually find like an email, that means that the user exists and that means they can log in. But if we can't find a user, that's a problem. They should not be logging in. They should be making an account. So we're going to want to maybe send a response.status 400 with like the JSON message that user does not exist. Please sign up. How much battery do I have left? 8%. Okay. It's gonna be a bit tight. User does not exist. Please sign up. And that should tell like the user to kind of sign up. And then I do not need to make a new user object. This user already exists. And it's stored within this user up here. So this user found one email that should return me the user object of the person who has already been in there. So I'm chilling. That is good. That is exactly what I want. And the next thing I want to do is double check and make sure that their password is valid. So I want to make this maybe is match. And the way I want to use this is I want to await bcrypt to compare the two values, so user.password, and then the password passed in. And remember that the passwords are encrypted. So whenever I pass them in, bcrypt has to do all the comparing for us to make sure that these passwords are the exact same and to make sure that this person is logging in with the correct passwords. And this will return me like a Boolean that tells me if these two things are the same or if they're different. So like the next thing I want to do is I want to have like an if statement over here. So if they are not a match, so like if the passwords are long, then I'd want to do like a I'd want to return a response.status 400 because this is an incorrect query, and I'd want to make a JSON object where I'd have the message, maybe like incorrect password or something. So there we go. And that should be good. And again, I don't need to use consult or hashing the password again. Password's already been hashed, so I don't need to take a look at that and make sure that's okay. And the next thing I'm kind of going to want to do is very similar to what I did last time. So I'm going to want to make sure that I'm going to have the payload again. So I don't need to save. I don't need to save this user to the database. They're already in the database. I'm going to have this payload, and I'm going to do jwt.sign. So I'm going to like double check whether their token is all good. When they're logging in, I'm going to want to send them another token. So I'm going to want to send them another token. And that's going to have like this expires in value 3600. It's going to have the same random string as we had before. And it's also going to have the payload, which we had in the previous JSON web token. And it's going to be like pretty much the exact same thing as we did last time. And then I'm also going to have a catch error down here. So that's pretty much, it's pretty much very similar to what we did last time. And we can go ahead and just test to make sure that this guy works. And let's go to Postman. So if we test out /login, it should work. So the password is incorrect. Let's make sure that first this user is signed up. Yes, so they exist. And then I want to go to the /login. And maybe I'm using the wrong URL. So I am using the right URL. So then I'm probably not making this isMatch statement correct. So isMatch is await wait. So not isMatch. Okay, so that's if the isMatch is false, then this should give me some value. And it could be because maybe I flipped the values around. Maybe this is supposed to be like this. Shouldn't really matter too much, but we'll see. There we go. Okay, for some reason it was that. And I got the token back. And the token is this value. So whenever you're logging in, you should also get a token. That's because like some users log in after they've signed up for a very long time and they might need a new JWT token or JSON web token. So that's why we get the token back. And it works pretty much the exact same way functionally as the previous time. And the last thing we're going to do in this demo is we're just going to demonstrate how to use middlewares. So middleware is anything that takes a request and a response and then does something with it, but doesn't send a response back. Instead, it creates like, it alters the request in some way and then passes that on to another function that can do all that work for us. So normally, we just have functions that take a request and a response and then immediately send a response somewhere, right? We're always sending a response with a token, but what we want to do is instead of doing that, maybe alter the request and let somebody else do the work on the response and then tell us that that response is good or if that response works. So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to first minimize these. And then I'm going to want to maybe make some middleware. So I'm going to want to make a folder called middleware. And these are like kind of like functions or helper functions you guys can use. So if you ever done like any other coding class, use helper functions to help you make other functions. You can think of middleware like that. That's pretty much like helper. They're like the helper functions of backend coding. So we can make a folder called auth. Should be auth.js. Okay. And at the very top, I want to import some stuff. So I want to import JWT. JSON web token. And then if I think I should be good with just that, and then I can just go directly into a function equals function with a request, response, and next. So here I made a function. So it literally is a function and it takes request, response, and then next. And next is a function that allows you to just pass on that information to a different function rather than returning a response yourself. So it just alters the request and then passes on that information. And then we're going to start with getting the token value. So I believe it's like that. And you just query the value of the token from the header. So tokens are passed through the header of the request. So in the request header, you can get the value of the token and then store it in a variable to use it somewhere. And then if the token doesn't exist, you want to return some error message. So if not token, maybe just return a res dot status 400. So that means like the request was bad and did not contain the necessary information. And you can send like maybe an error message saying error JSON web token not valid. So yeah, this will just send like this message to the user if the token is not valid for whatever reason. And this could be like their end or our end. And the next thing we want to do is we want to have a try catch block where this just tries, and if there's an error, then it pushes the error out, and we want a const decoded, which equals the function jwt.verify token, and then whatever random string we put earlier. So for us, that was just literally random string. So that verifies that the token has the right signature based on the random string. And if it does, then we are good. So we do the following, and then finally we pass on this information. So this request.user now is equal to decoder.user, and then we pass that information forward. And then we just make the catch block. Are there any questions? Did I see like a hand goes up?
Oh, sorry, what is next? Again, but when you pass it in.
So next, all it does is just passes on whatever information I've changed here to any other function that's using this like helper function in a sense. So right now, as you can see, I've changed the request values. So I've changed request.user to decoder.user.
And then next. simplify.
Next just sends it forward to whatever other function comes after. Yeah, good question. Are there any more questions? Okay. Then I want to catch the error, and then I can just like maybe return console.log the error and then return or res.status. So this is an internal server error if it doesn't work. So I just want to make sure you do that. And then the message can be there is an error in the computation of the JSON web. Or yeah, let's go. So it'll just send that message if like there are any issues. And you should probably make your messages way less verbose, but I'm just doing this for now. It doesn't matter too much. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. The final thing we kind of want to do is we want to go back to roots in user.js, and we want to add a router.get method. Whoops, not with curly braces. So you use parentheses whenever using router.get. And there's like a lot of weird syntax when it comes to backend. It's like tough when you're just learning it, but you'll get used to it hopefully over time. And in the router.get thing, you're going to want to have slash. So you're going to want to have the pathway /me, and /me. Auth and then async request and response. And then you're going to want to have an arrow function. And then you're going to want to put the value of request or auth down there. So that's pretty much it for this part of the equation. So we can just like, we can just put that information in here. So we can have like const, we want auth, and we can import that from /middleware /auth. And then we want to put the values within the specific block of code. We're going to want to have a try statement. And within this try statement, we're going to have like something making sure that the user exists. And then request.user.id. And then we're going to want to use, then we're going to want to send the user as a JSON object back. And then we're going to finally catch the error. And then if that happens, we want to send the message like, we're going to want to send like maybe a JSON object. So res.status, maybe like 500 dot JSON. Message error in fetching. Cool. So what this piece of code will do is it's just allowing us to test that if the user is giving like the correct JSON web token, whenever they pass that information, is it right, first of all? And it allows us to authenticate that. And if there's some error, we just set an error in fetching. And that's pretty much it. So this is just a .get method. And it's like really useful for just understanding if the user's JSON web token is valid. And then if it's not for some reason, then we like kick them out or something. So if you guys remember like the fourth and fifth step, once a user has like a JSON web token stored on their device locally, they'll just send that instead of their username and email. So we want some way of just authenticating that the user is legit based on that JSON web token. And that's what this block of code is doing. And yeah, that's pretty much it for today's lesson. Are there any like final questions about middleware, about making the routes, or about anything we've done? Okay, so if there are no questions, you guys are free to leave. And before I forget, the secret word for today is mango. So instead of Mongo, mango. So just go ahead and put that into the form. And that's pretty much it. If you guys have any questions, you guys are more than welcome to stay. And if not, you guys can leave.